A shout tore through the lecture hall. "Get out, you filthy child! Harvard is no place for the janitor's grandson!" The boy clutched his battered notebook like a scrap of firewood, retreating toward the door. Yet in the final instant, his eyes caught the chalk on the blackboard, an endless sum they called the Riemann zeta function. The winter nights in Cambridge cut like broken glass. Wind swept in from the river, slid under old oak doors, and rattled along the stone corridors of Harvard. A janitor's cart moved slowly through that emptiness, its wheels squeaking against the marble floor. Behind it walked Mrs. Alvarez, her shoulders bent, her breath uneven, her hands wrapped in worn gloves that no longer kept out the cold. Beside her, half hidden in the dimness, trailed her grandson. Sam was 13, slight as a reed, his shoes soaked through by slush. He followed not because he had to, but because the night was safer near her, and because these halls, glittering with the knowledge of the world, had become for him a secret cathedral. That night, light spilled from the half-open door of Emerson Hall, room 103. Voices murmured inside. Chalk scraped against the board in a steady rhythm. Mrs. Alvarez paused. Knowing the look in Sam's eyes, she whispered, "Sit in the back. Don't make a sound." Sam slipped through the door. The lecture hall was tiered like a theater. He climbed to the top row where a broken bulb left a pocket of shadow. From there, he watched the man at the board, Professor Hamilton, tall, severe, chalk dust whitening the sleeve of his dark suit. On the blackboard glowed a line of symbols. The professor's voice carried, rich and grave. "This," he declared, "is the Riemann zeta function. Hidden inside it lies the secret rhythm of the prime numbers, the atoms of arithmetic, the heartbeat of mathematics itself." Sam didn't understand the words in full, but he felt them. Heartbeat. Rhythm. He clutched his notebook closer. On the page he wrote in a shaky hand, "Numbers can sing." Hamilton spoke of a hypothesis laid down more than a century ago, that every strange solution to this infinite sum lined up on a single invisible line. If true, the chaos of the primes would reveal its hidden order, like a melody emerging from static. If false, the foundations of modern thought would tremble. The graduate students listened, some scribbling, some nodding. Sam's breath clouded in the cold air of the gallery. His eyes did not leave the chalk marks, glowing like constellations scattered across the night. The break came. Students shuffled, laughed, poured into the aisles. Sam pressed himself into the shadows, praying no one would see. When the room quieted again, he crept lower, close enough to feel the chalk dust that floated from the board. He stretched out a finger, barely touching one white curve. It felt like touching frost or starlight. Then the door banged open. A young assistant with a stack of papers stopped short, staring at him. "What are you doing here?" Sam froze. I came with my grandmother. She cleans the halls." The assistant frowned. "This is a graduate class. You don't belong." Before Sam could move, another voice cut through the room, sharp as a whip. Hamilton had returned. His eyes narrowed as they fell on the ragged boy by the board. "Out!" he thundered. "This is Harvard, not a shelter. Get out, you filthy child!" The words struck like a blow. Sam's chest clenched. He hugged his notebook against him as though it were a coal pulled from a dying fire, the only warmth he owned. He backed toward the door, his ears burning. But in the final instant, before the heavy door slammed behind him, his gaze lifted once more. The chalked sum was still there, endless, luminous. And though he was cast into the cold, that light branded itself into his mind. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting in the corridor, her mop leaning against the wall. She had heard. She said nothing at first, only laid her cracked hand on the boy's thin shoulder. Then, softly, "Come, mi niño. The wind is cruel tonight." They walked home through the frozen streets. The boy's shoes filled with snowmelt. The woman's cough shook her frame. They had little to warm them but the memory of what had been glimpsed, a blackboard full of symbols that spoke of order hidden in chaos, of music hidden in silence. Later, in the single-room apartment that smelled of damp plaster and cheap soup, Sam opened his notebook. By the flicker of a weak lamp, he wrote one sentence in uneven letters. "If I am thrown out of the light, I will carry a piece of the light with me." He set down his pencil, closed the notebook, and lay beside his grandmother on the narrow bed. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, sometimes in clusters, sometimes in gaps, but always falling with a rhythm. Sam listened, and in that rhythm he thought he heard the primes whispering. In the mornings, after long nights of cleaning, Mrs. Alvarez's hands trembled as she brewed weak coffee in their tiny kitchen. Sam would sit at the rickety table with his notebook open, eyes still lit by what he had glimpsed on the blackboard. The chalk lines haunted him. Not the words shouted by Hamilton, but the quiet, luminous pattern that seemed to speak to him from beyond the board. One day, on his way back from helping his grandmother push her cart down the basement corridor of the library, Sam saw a cardboard box marked "Discarded." Inside lay torn journals, obsolete manuals, and a single worn volume with its spine broken, a short history of number theory. He pulled it out as if rescuing something alive from a trash heap. The book was too advanced, filled with names and theorems that felt like a foreign tongue. Yet the stories it told were clear. There was a boy named Gauss in Germany, a poor child like himself, who once amazed his teacher by summing numbers faster than any grown man could follow. Sam's eyes widened. A boy, not much older than he had been then, lifting himself by sheer brilliance into history. And there was Bernhard Riemann, shy and sickly, raised by a pastor in poverty, known for wandering fields lost in thought. Riemann, who drew invisible bridges between the world of geometry and the secret harmonies of numbers. Sam read that when Riemann stood before the Academy in Berlin to present his ideas, even the great mathematicians listened as if struck by lightning. These stories were more than mathematics. They were lives carved out of hardship, voices that whispered to Sam that intellect did not belong only to the rich or the well-fed. Gauss had been the son of a bricklayer. Riemann had lived with illness and doubt. Yet their names endured on the lips of professors a century later, while the names of kings and merchants had faded. Sam sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing his finger over the lines in the book. The paper smelled of dust, the ink faint. He could not solve the formulas on the page, but the shapes of the graphs, the curves marked "distribution of primes," stirred something inside him. To him it looked like waves breaking on an unseen shore, sometimes close, sometimes far apart, but never ceasing. At night, he showed the book to his grandmother. She squinted at the faded print. "I can't follow these," she admitted. "But tell me in your words." Sam smiled faintly. "They're saying that prime numbers, those numbers that can't be broken into smaller parts, don't appear at random. There's a rhythm, like the way your cough comes, sometimes after 5 breaths, sometimes after 10. It feels random, but it follows a deeper beat." Mrs. Alvarez chuckled, though her chest rattled. "So even my cough belongs to mathematics?" "Yes," Sam whispered, his eyes glowing. "Everything does." For a moment, the boy's enthusiasm made her forget the chill in her bones. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and imagined her cough not as weakness, but as part of some hidden symphony. But the world was not kind. That winter was the harshest in years. Pipes froze in their building, and one morning Sam woke to find his grandmother's breath thin and wheezing. He brewed tea with the last of the herbs, wrapped her shoulders in a blanket, and sat silently by her side. His notebook lay open on his knees, but he could not bring himself to write. Later that week, Hamilton's voice echoed again in the hall when Sam slipped near room 103. The professor was pacing, lecturing about how modern cryptography depended on the mystery of prime numbers. Without their unpredictability, he said, your bank accounts, your secrets, your governments would be exposed. Sam listened from the hallway. He thought of Gauss, of Riemann, of the story that a single line could hold the key to all this order. He thought of his grandmother coughing in the night, of unpaid hospital bills from years before, of the smallness of their life compared to the immensity on that board. And yet he felt, with a child's certainty, that somehow he stood on the same road that Gauss and Riemann had once walked. That night, by candlelight, he drew in his notebook. He sketched dots for prime numbers, marking them across the page until they looked like scattered stars. Then he drew a wavering line through them, trying to find a melody in the mess. His hand trembled, but his heart beat steady. He whispered to himself, "One day, I'll follow their footsteps." His grandmother stirred in her sleep, and Sam gently closed the book. He sat listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. To him it was like the rhythm of primes, irregular, fragile, but real. And in that fragile rhythm, Sam felt the same promise Gauss must have felt as a boy, the same hope Riemann carried in his lonely walks, that hidden within chaos lay the order of eternity. Snow fell harder that week, muffling the city in white silence. Harvard's towers glowed faintly in the winter dusk, but inside the lecture halls the lamps burned bright, their light catching on chalk dust that floated like tiny constellations. Sam lingered again near room 103. He could not stay away. The voices, the cadence of chalk, the sense that something immense was unfolding behind those walls. It pulled him like the pull of gravity itself. That night, Mrs. Alvarez was sweeping the corridor when Hamilton's voice carried out, sharper than usual. "We do not chase fairy tales here. We pursue rigor. The Riemann hypothesis is not a parlor game. It is the mountain of mathematics, and only those prepared to suffer on its slopes have any right to approach it." Sam slipped inside, heart pounding, and climbed to his usual place in the shadows. He sat quietly, notebook open, listening. Hamilton's face was stern, carved as though from stone. His reputation was legendary at Harvard. Brilliant, exacting, feared. He had little patience for hesitation, none at all for error. Students whispered that he could reduce an eager scholar to silence with a single glance. "Imagine," Hamilton thundered, chalk striking the board, "that prime numbers are footsteps scattered across an endless road. To prove Riemann's hypothesis is to prove those footsteps follow a rhythm, even if we cannot yet hear it. Without proof, all we have are guesses, however beautiful." Sam's pencil scratched across his page. Footsteps, rhythm, hidden music. He thought of the dots he had drawn in his notebook the night before, of the wavering line he had tried to trace among them. It felt as though Hamilton was speaking directly into his secret thoughts. But then, something slipped from Sam's lips before he could stop it. A whisper, really, meant only for himself. "If all the footsteps line up, then the walk is steady, like a heartbeat." The words echoed in the still room. Heads turned. A graduate student frowned, and Hamilton himself stopped mid-sentence, chalk poised in the air. "Who said that?" Sam froze. His throat was dry. He thought perhaps no one would notice, but Hamilton's eyes were sharp, sweeping the hall. They found the boy in the shadows, thin, shivering, notebook pressed to his chest. "You." The professor's voice cut through the room. "Stand." Sam rose slowly, his legs weak beneath him. He wanted to vanish, to fold into the darkness, but there was no hiding. "Do you even know what you are speaking of?" Hamilton demanded. His tone was not curious, not gentle, but accusatory, as if Sam had committed a crime by daring to speak. "I only meant—" Sam stammered. His voice trembled but carried. "If what you said is true, if all the solutions line up on that line, then the primes, they wouldn't stumble. They would keep time, like a march, like the beating of a heart." For a long second, silence gripped the room. The graduate students looked at one another, some with smirks, others with a kind of puzzled respect. A child, barely more than a ragged intruder, had spoken the essence of Riemann's dream in the plainest words. Hamilton's jaw tightened. He did not look impressed. Instead, he slammed the chalk onto the ledge. "Do you think this is child's play?" he barked. "Do you imagine that in one sentence, with no training, no discipline, you can grasp what the greatest minds of centuries have failed to prove? Do not mock this institution with your poetry." Sam's face burned. He had not meant to mock. He had only spoken what seemed to him the simplest truth. But the professor's words lashed him like a whip. Hamilton's eyes narrowed further. "Whose child are you?" "No, wait. I know. You are the janitor's grandson. I have seen you skulking in these halls." His voice rose, loud enough to shake the rafters. "This is Harvard, not a playground for strays. Out! Do not return." The words fell heavy, final. Sam stood there, frozen, notebook clutched in white knuckles. He heard a murmur ripple through the students, some uneasy, some amused. He looked toward the door where his grandmother had paused with her mop, her face pale, her eyes wet with shame and sorrow. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, he bowed his head, gathered his courage, and whispered almost to himself, "I wasn't mocking. I was listening." Then he turned, walked up the aisle, and slipped out into the cold. That night in their small room, Mrs. Alvarez laid a hand on his cheek. Her palm was rough, cracked by cleaning chemicals, but warm. "Sam," she said gently, "the proud build walls around knowledge. But walls can't hold back light forever. You saw something tonight. I saw it in your eyes." Sam opened his notebook. His hand shook as he wrote a single line. "If they shut me out, I will listen harder through the door." He looked at his grandmother, who was coughing softly beneath her blanket, and smiled faintly. Gauss was poor. Riemann was sick. Maybe Harvard thinks I don't belong. But the rhythm of numbers doesn't belong to Harvard. It belongs to anyone who hears it. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, her eyes bright. "Then keep listening, mi niño. One day the world will hear you." Outside, the snow fell in heavy silence, covering footprints, covering roads, yet falling with its own rhythm. Sam lay awake long after midnight, hearing it in his heart, the steady beat of something greater than himself, something no insult could erase. The lamp in their little room was no more than a crooked stem with a fading bulb. Its light wavered, yellow and tired, but it was all they had against the winter dark. Sam often sat beside it with his notebook, his face pale in the glow, while his grandmother coughed quietly on the bed. The nights grew harsher. Pipes rattled with ice, and the thin walls let in drafts that turned the corners of the room into frozen shadows. Mrs. Alvarez worked her hours at Harvard without complaint, but each morning she returned weaker, her hands shaking more as she tried to hold her coffee cup. Sam noticed. He noticed the blue veins showing on her temples, the way her coughs stole her breath, the lines of exhaustion carved deeper into her face. He wanted to ask her to stop working, to rest, but without her wages, there would be no rent, no food, no lamp, and so he said nothing. He only promised himself that he would study harder, write more, listen more. One evening, as she lay bundled in blankets, he opened the old, discarded book and began to read aloud. "It says here," he explained, tracing the faded words with his finger, "that Riemann was often ill. He lived in poverty, too, but he carried inside him an idea so big the world still hasn't caught up to it. He believed the primes had a hidden rhythm, not random, not wild, a rhythm waiting to be heard." Mrs. Bull. Alvarez's eyes glistened in the lamp's glow. Her voice was weak but steady. "And you? Do you hear it, Sam?" Sam lowered his gaze. "I don't know. Sometimes when I look at the dots in my notebook, I think I almost do. But maybe it's just my imagination." His grandmother reached for his hand. Her palm was rough, the skin cracked from years of cleaning floors and scrubbing sinks, but the touch carried all the warmth left in her. "Your imagination," she whispered, "is a gift. Don't let anyone shame you out of it. Even if that man with the chalk shouts you down." Sam swallowed hard. "He hates me, Abuela. He thinks I don't belong there." Mrs. Alvarez smiled faintly, her breath shallow. "Listen, mi niño. The proud often mistake the poor for the unworthy. But the truth is this. Wisdom has no master. Not Harvard, not kings, not the rich. If you hear something in those numbers, then it belongs to you as much as to them." Her words wrapped around him like a quilt. He looked at her face, fragile under the blanket, and felt a rush of fierce protectiveness. He knew she was carrying too much, cleaning halls while her lungs wheezed for air. He hated that he could not ease her burden. But he could promise her this, that he would carry her faith in him forward, no matter the sneers, no matter the doors slammed in his face. Later that night, as the lamp flickered and nearly went out, Mrs. Alvarez suddenly collapsed into a violent coughing fit. Sam rushed to her side, holding her shoulders as she struggled for breath. For a terrifying moment, he thought she would slip away right then. But slowly, painfully, the coughing subsided. Her eyes closed, her body slackened. Sam stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in the lamplight, notebook on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. He whispered to himself like a vow, "One day, I will make this worth it. All your nights of work, all your pain. One day, I'll find the rhythm Riemann spoke of, and it won't be for them. It will be for you." At dawn, the lamp finally burned out with a faint pop. The room sank into dim gray light. Sam felt the weight of the silence pressing on him. He pulled the notebook close, opened it to a clean page, and wrote in uneven letters, "The lamp may die, but the light remains in me." He set down the pencil, looked once more at his sleeping grandmother, and knew that whatever happened, however cold the nights became, the glow of that blackboard and the warmth of her faith would guide him forward. The first hints of spring had not yet softened the frost, but the halls of Harvard grew louder as the semester moved on. Posters lined the bulletin boards, talks about artificial intelligence in finance, cryptography and the future of security, and big data in global markets. Words Sam barely understood, but that shimmered with mystery. One evening, while pushing her cart past Sanders Theater, Mrs. Alvarez paused to catch her breath. Through the open doors drifted voices and the smell of polished wood. "Go on," she whispered to Sam, "but be careful." Sam slipped inside. The grand hall was crowded, not with students this time, but with men in dark suits and women in sharp dresses, the kind of people whose shoes never touched the snowmelt puddles he walked through each morning. At the front, Professor Hamilton stood again, this time not before chalk, but behind a shining lectern. His voice boomed through the microphone, steady, authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "modern finance rests upon the bedrock of prime numbers. Every transaction, every encrypted message, every digital vault relies on their unpredictability. And at the heart of that unpredictability lies a mystery. The Riemann hypothesis." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Sam clutched his notebook tighter. Hamilton continued. "For over a century, mathematicians have tested its truth. Every zero we've checked aligns perfectly, as if the primes dance to a rhythm too subtle for the ear. On this assumption, we build cryptographic systems. On this assumption, trillion-dollar markets stand secure. And here at Harvard, we are developing algorithms that bring this ancient riddle into the service of modern wealth." He gestured to a screen where lines of code and colorful graphs flashed. "We are close to an agreement with one of the world's largest investment firms. If successful, it will bring $1 billion endowment to this university. Knowledge and capital, hand in hand." The audience applauded. Sam shrank into his seat at the back. $1 billion. He thought of the unpaid medical bills stacked in a shoebox under his grandmother's bed. He thought of the broken lamp that barely gave light. The gulf between that shining stage and his dim little room felt as wide as an ocean. Yet as he listened, unease grew in him. Hamilton spoke of primes as if they were tamed, predictable enough to harness for profit. But hadn't the discarded book warned him otherwise? Hadn't Riemann's question remained unanswered precisely because the order of the primes was delicate, uncertain, fragile? Sam's pencil scratched on the page. If they are wrong, if the rhythm stumbles, the system could fall. The thought chilled him. What would happen if the billion-dollar foundation was built on a rhythm that one day broke? If the hidden order of the primes refused to obey? That night, back in their room, Sam told his grandmother what he had heard. She was lying propped up on pillows, pale and weary, but her eyes stayed fixed on him as he spoke. "They're betting everything on it, Abuela," he whispered. "On a question no one has answered. On something Riemann only dreamed." Mrs. Alvarez reached for his hand. "Do you understand the question?" "Not all of it," Sam admitted. "But I understand the danger. If the primes don't follow the rhythm they believe in, then everything built on it could collapse. Banks, secrets, Harvard itself." Her gaze softened at his fire. She smiled faintly, even through her exhaustion. "Then maybe the world needs someone to remind them that not every song has been written yet." Sam lowered his gaze, overcome by both fear and resolve. He was only a janitor's grandson, barely keeping warm at night. But he had seen enough to know that wealth and pride could blind even the greatest minds. The chalk lines on the blackboard were not just abstractions. They were fragile promises, and if broken, the consequences would reach far beyond Harvard's gates. Later, when Mrs. Alvarez had fallen asleep, Sam opened his notebook and wrote across a blank page. "If the primes falter, the towers of money will shake." The words frightened him, but he left them there, a truth too heavy to erase. He closed the notebook and lay awake listening to his grandmother's shallow breathing, praying that whatever rhythm governed the universe would grant her one more morning. The snow outside had turned to sleet, slicking the cobblestones with a dangerous sheen. But inside Harvard's grandest halls, the air was warm, perfumed with ambition. The event that evening was no ordinary lecture. It was a presentation to donors, investors, and men whose watches cost more than Mrs. Alvarez earned in a year. Sam followed his grandmother's cart down the corridor, his heart pulling him toward the sound of microphones and applause. She looked at him with tired eyes. "Careful," she murmured. But she did not stop him. She never stopped him when it came to learning. The hall glittered with chandeliers. Sam slipped into the back, unnoticed among the ushers. At the podium stood Professor Hamilton, his presence commanding, his voice carefully measured to impress both scholars and financiers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we live in an age where information is power and power is money. But behind every digital fortress, every encrypted bank account, every national security code lies the same humble mystery: prime numbers. And behind primes lies the great unsolved riddle of our age, the Riemann hypothesis." Gasps, nods, polite murmurs. The professor allowed them, then pressed forward. "For over a century, mathematicians have hunted its truth. Every test has affirmed it. Every zero discovered has marched in perfect rhythm, as if obeying a law older than time. And so we build upon it. But here at Harvard, we go further. We are creating algorithms, born of artificial intelligence, that transform this mystery into profit." A slide lit up behind him, dazzling graphs, streams of data, projections of staggering returns. Sam's eyes widened. The words rolled over him: unbreakable security, predictable risk, guaranteed profit. Yet he heard something else in between the lines: arrogance, assumption, the casual belief that what was not yet proven could still be sold as certainty. At a long table sat men in black suits, their expressions cool. One leaned over to another and whispered, "Once the deal is signed, this could move billions overnight. The banks will follow Harvard's lead. No one will dare question it." Sam shivered. He scribbled in his notebook. "They are building palaces on sand." Hamilton's voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "Our partners," he said, gesturing to the investors, "will help us test these models on real markets. If successful, the agreement will bring $1 billion into this university. A new wing of research, a new era of prestige. Harvard will not just teach history, it will shape it." Applause thundered. But Sam saw more than applause. He saw the glint in the eyes of the investors, sharp, predatory, as though they were not buying knowledge but buying the illusion of certainty. He saw Hamilton's shoulders squared in triumph, yet behind the polish there was a flicker of something else: desperation. And then, a voice from the audience. "Professor Hamilton, forgive the bluntness. But what if the hypothesis is wrong?" The room went still. Hamilton's jaw tightened. His answer came quick, too quick. "It is not wrong. 1 billion verifications have shown it true. To doubt it is to doubt the foundations of modern science." The investor smiled thinly. "Foundations have cracked before. Markets have collapsed on smaller doubts." For a heartbeat, Hamilton's face hardened. Then he forced a smile. "And that is why we have safeguards, simulations, artificial intelligence. Even chaos can be modeled when one has the right mathematics." Laughter, relieved, scattered through the hall. But Sam's skin prickled. He had read enough of the dusty book to know proofs by example were no proof at all. Riemann's question was still unanswered, and if the world built its vaults and fortunes upon an unanswered question, what would happen when, not if but when, the silence broke? That night, in their small room, Sam told his grandmother every word. She listened in the lamplight, her breath thin but steady. "They're not just teaching anymore," Sam whispered. "They're selling certainty that doesn't exist. If they're wrong, it won't just be Harvard that falls. It will be banks, governments, people's lives." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes darkened with worry. "And you, mi niño? What will you do?" Sam looked at his notebook, the words he had scrawled. "If the primes falter, the towers of money will shake." He shut it with trembling hands. I don't know yet, but I can't just stay quiet. In the silence that followed, the old lamp hummed. The snow tapped the window, and the boy, shivering in the night, felt the first shadow of an idea, that perhaps his voice, unwelcome in the lecture hall, might one day be the only one left to warn them. The evening of the signing arrived like a storm building behind closed windows. For weeks, the whispers had grown louder. Harvard was about to secure a partnership that would flood the university with more money than any grant in its history. The investors had flown in from New York, from London, from Singapore. Security guards lined the hall. Cameras had been set up to record the moment. Sam followed his grandmother that night as she pushed her cart across the marble floors, though she begged him to stay home. Please, mi niño, she coughed. There will be too many eyes. Too much danger. But Sam shook his head. I have to see. The hall glowed like a cathedral of wealth. Rows of silk suits and pearl necklaces shimmered under chandeliers. At the front stood Professor Hamilton, impeccable in a black suit, his silver hair shining under the lights. He looked less like a teacher and more like a king about to crown himself. On the screen behind him danced graphs and charts, glowing in confident colors, lines that promised stability, curves that sang of profit. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamilton intoned, his voice smooth as glass. Tonight, we step into a new era. Tonight, Harvard proves that even the oldest mysteries of mathematics can serve the engines of modern finance. With our algorithm, built upon the hidden rhythm of the primes, risk itself becomes predictable. The crowd murmured approval. At a long mahogany table, contracts lay ready, the ink of $1 billion waiting to dry. Sam stood at the back, almost hidden behind a pillar. His heart hammered. He thought of the dusty book, of Gauss and Riemann, of every page he had copied by lamplight. He thought of the investors whispering that doubt could topple markets, and of Hamilton brushing it aside with arrogance. He thought of his grandmother coughing into the dark, while this room glittered with wealth built on an unanswered question. He couldn't stay silent. The moment came when Hamilton lifted the pen. The cameras clicked. The crowd leaned forward. And then a voice, small but steady, cut across the hall. Wait. Heads turned. The word seemed too thin, too fragile, yet it froze the air. Sam stepped into the light. His coat was threadbare, his shoes wet with melted snow. In his hands he clutched his battered notebook. His voice shook but did not break. You can't sign that. You're building on something unproven. Gasps rippled through the room. A security guard moved, but Hamilton lifted a hand to stop him. His eyes, sharp as blades, locked on the boy. You again, he hissed. The janitor's grandson. Sam swallowed, but he stood his ground. The Riemann hypothesis hasn't been proven. Everyone knows that. If it's wrong, the rhythm of the primes falters. And if your algorithm depends on that rhythm, then all your promises are lies. A murmur spread like fire through the audience. Investors exchanged glances, some narrowing their eyes, others suddenly uneasy. Hamilton's face darkened. He laughed, but it was brittle. A child dares to lecture Harvard? Do you even know what you are speaking of? Sam held up his notebook. Its pages were filled with dots, lines, crude drawings of stars and waves. I don't know everything, but I know this. You can't build an empire on a question mark. If the primes stumble, your $1 billion will crumble, and everyone who trusted you will fall with it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Then one of the investors, the same sharp-eyed man who had challenged Hamilton weeks before, leaned back in his chair, studying the boy with interest. Is what he says true? He asked calmly. Hamilton's voice faltered for the first time. It's irrelevant. Probability is certainty enough. We've tested billions of cases. But not infinity, Sam said softly. The investor's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The spell of Hamilton's confidence had cracked. Hamilton slammed the pen down. "This is nonsense! Remove him!" 2 guards stepped forward. Mrs. Alvarez, standing in the corner with her mop, cried out hoarsely, "No!" Her frail body trembled, but her eyes blazed with a fierce light. "He only speaks the truth." The room hung suspended between wealth and warning, between arrogance and honesty. Cameras whirred, investors whispered, and Sam, trembling but unbroken, whispered to himself as the guards approached. Better to be thrown into the cold again than to let the world march blindly into fire. The confrontation hung in the hall like smoke after a fire. The investors whispered among themselves, their voices sharp as knives. The guards held Sam by the shoulders, ready to drag him out. But no one moved. For in that silence, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it would not be ignored. At the far end of the table, an older man stirred. Professor Whitmore, long retired, had once been a giant in the department, though now age had bent his back and dulled his voice. He leaned on his cane, rising slowly as though the weight of the years was heavier than the room itself. "Release the boy," he said quietly. The guards hesitated, then obeyed. Sam stumbled free, clutching his notebook against his chest like armor. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles and looked not at Sam, but at Hamilton. "I have sat in this university longer than most in this room have been alive. I have seen brilliance, I have seen arrogance, and I know the difference." His voice, though thin, carried to every corner. "This boy is right to remind us. The Riemann hypothesis is unproven. To build unshakable systems on it is to gamble with shadows." A murmur rose, this time tinged with unease. The investors leaned forward. One of them snapped, "So you admit there is risk?" Hamilton's face flushed. "Every endeavor carries risk, but probability is enough. We don't need a proof when reality itself behaves as if the hypothesis were true." Whitmore shook his head slowly. "That is faith, not knowledge. And when money and power dress faith as certainty, it becomes deception." The words cut through the hall. Sam felt his heart leap. For the first time, someone of authority had spoken aloud what he had only whispered in his notebook. The investors began to murmur again, their voices sharp. "Billions on the line." Unstable assumptions. "If this leaks to the press..." Hamilton tried to recover. His voice rose, hard, commanding. "Enough of this. You think a ragged child and a tired old man can shake centuries of confidence? The hypothesis has stood every test. To call it uncertain now is to invite chaos." "Perhaps," Whitmore said evenly. "But truth does not change to suit your contracts." The tension snapped. The sharp-eyed investor who had questioned Hamilton before slammed his palm on the table. "Until this is resolved, my firm withdraws. We will not gamble $1 billion on a dream." Others followed, some quietly, some with anger. The glittering deal began to unravel before Hamilton's eyes. The applause he had craved was gone, replaced by whispers of scandal and betrayal. Sam stood frozen, his notebook trembling in his hands. He had not planned this. He had not meant to humiliate anyone. He had only spoken what felt true. Yet now he watched as the mighty professor's empire cracked like glass under the weight of that truth. Hamilton turned, his face contorted with fury. For a moment, Sam thought the man might strike him. But then Hamilton's voice dropped to a whisper so low only Sam could hear. "You have ruined me." Sam met his eyes. His own voice was quiet, steady. "No, I only reminded them what you forgot." Hamilton's jaw tightened. He turned away, gathering his papers in shaking hands, his pride bleeding into silence. The hall emptied in waves, investors angry, students bewildered, faculty whispering. Cameras snapped, capturing not triumph but collapse. When it was over, Sam remained standing in the vast, echoing room. His grandmother came to his side, her hand slipping into his. Her eyes were wet, her chest rattling with each breath, but her voice carried a kind of reverence. "Sam," she whispered, "you spoke for more than yourself tonight. You spoke for truth, even when it cost you everything." Sam looked at her, at the woman who had scrubbed these very floors so he could sit in the shadows of knowledge. His heart ached with both pride and fear, for he knew this was not the end. Truth had been spoken, but pride and power would not forgive so easily. He closed his notebook and whispered back, "I only hope the truth is enough." Outside, the snow was falling again, heavy and relentless, blanketing the world in silence. The scandal spread faster than snow melting on stone. By morning, whispers of the failed Harvard deal had reached newspapers and blogs. Some headlines praised the caution, others mocked the arrogance. But one detail emerged in every telling: the interruption of a ragged boy, a janitor's grandson, who had dared to question the billion-dollar dream. Hamilton raged in silence. His reputation, once untouchable, now carried cracks. Colleagues avoided his gaze in the halls. Donors hesitated. Students whispered. Yet it was not Harvard that bore the brunt of his anger. It was Sam. The boy felt the change almost immediately. Doors once left ajar were now locked. Guards lingered longer near the lecture halls. Even the young assistant who had once slipped him a book avoided his eyes, his fear too great. Sam was no longer invisible. He was marked. And at home, Mrs. Alvarez grew weaker. The winter had gnawed at her lungs until each breath rattled like broken glass. She still worked when she could, refusing pity, but her steps grew shorter, her nights filled with coughing that shook the thin walls. One evening, Sam sat beside her bed, notebook open, trying to hide his trembling hands. She reached for his cheek with fingers that felt light as paper. "My brave boy," she whispered. "You carried light into a room full of shadows. I saw it with my own eyes." Sam shook his head. "I only made things worse. They hate me now. And you're paying the price. Maybe if I'd stayed quiet." "No." Her voice was faint but firm. "Never regret speaking the truth. Silence is the real poison. You cannot heal lies by swallowing them." He bent his head against her frail hand. "But I don't want to lose you." Her eyes softened. "You won't lose me, Sam. Even if this body gives out, I'll be in every number you write, every rhythm you hear. When you hear the snow tapping at the window, think of it as me. When you see the light on the blackboard, think of it as me. Nothing true is ever lost." That night, her cough worsened. She struggled for air, each gasp thinner than the last. Sam panicked, clutching her shoulders, whispering her name, praying. But the room was mercilessly quiet between each ragged breath. In the final hour before dawn, she opened her eyes one last time. "Promise me," she breathed, "you will carry the light forward." Sam's tears spilled freely now. "I promise." Her lips curved into a faint smile, and then, with a final breath that sounded like a sigh of release, she was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Sam held her hand long after it had grown cold. Outside, snowflakes drifted against the window, each one landing with a soft rhythm. He heard her in them, just as she had said. But the ache inside him was too great. The notebook slipped from his lap, its pages fanning across the floor. When the neighbors came, when the officials came, when the small body was carried away, Sam sat frozen, hollowed out by grief. That night he returned to Harvard. He walked the corridors alone, the weight of his promise pressing against his chest. The blackboards glowed faintly in the deserted rooms, still bearing the chalk scars of lectures. He traced one line with his finger, whispering to the empty hall. She said nothing true is ever lost. And though his heart was shattered, though his eyes were red with sorrow, he felt the faintest warmth stir inside him. A resolve. A vow. If he had lost his grandmother, he would not lose her light. He would carry it into every silence, into every locked door, into every cold night. Even if the world cast him out, he would not let the truth be forgotten. Sam closed his notebook on a new page. In large, unsteady letters, he wrote, "The price of light is loss. But without light there is nothing at all." He sat in the silent hall until morning came. Spring came late to Cambridge that year. Snow lingered on rooftops long after the crocuses should have bloomed. Sam moved through those days like a shadow, carrying his notebook, carrying the silence his grandmother had left behind. He still slipped into Harvard's halls at night, not to steal lectures, but to sit where the chalk dust hung like stars. Sometimes he whispered to the empty room, as though she could still hear. One evening, as twilight deepened, a figure appeared in the doorway of the lecture hall. Professor Hamilton. Sam froze. The man's presence once meant fear, thunder, humiliation. Now Hamilton looked older, diminished. His suit hung loose on his frame, his eyes hollow from weeks of disgrace. The billion-dollar deal had collapsed, his reputation torn in whispers and headlines. Once, he had been Harvard's proudest voice. Now he walked like someone carrying stones in his chest. "I thought I would find you here," Hamilton said quietly. Sam clutched his notebook tighter, bracing for scorn. But the professor's voice was different, low, almost hesitant. "I hated you," Hamilton admitted, his gaze fixed on the blackboard. "Not because you were wrong, but because you spoke aloud what I dared not face. I built my life on certainty, Sam. Certainty in the numbers, certainty in my own brilliance. But certainty is a brittle crown. You struck it from my head with a single sentence." He turned then, and for the first time Sam saw not the proud professor, but a man undone. "You ruined me," Hamilton whispered. "And yet, you may have saved me too." The words hung heavy in the room. Sam swallowed. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "I never wanted to ruin anyone. I only wanted to tell the truth. My grandmother taught me that silence is poison." Hamilton's face tightened at the mention of her. "I heard," he said gently, "about her passing. I am sorry." Sam nodded, the ache rising in his throat again. He looked down at his notebook. "She asked me to carry the light forward. That's all I'm trying to do." Hamilton stepped closer, his shoes echoing softly on the wood. "Then let me carry some of it with you. I can't erase what I said, what I did, but I can choose what I do now. Will you let me?" Sam hesitated. The memories of Hamilton's thunderous voice, the humiliation of being cast out, the way his grandmother had clutched his hand in the dark, they all surged back. But alongside them was her last whisper. "Nothing true is ever lost." Slowly, Sam nodded. "The light doesn't belong to me alone, or to you. It belongs to anyone who listens." For a long moment they stood together in silence, the boy and the broken teacher, the chalkboard between them like an altar. Hamilton reached for a piece of chalk. His hand shook slightly, but he pressed it to the board. "Once, I thought this meant glory," he said, sketching the faint outline of the zeta function. "Now I see it's only a question. And questions belong not to kings, but to children brave enough to ask." Sam opened his notebook, his small, uneven handwriting beside Hamilton's sharp symbols. 2 hands, 2 lives, both marked by pride and pain, now touched the same mystery. At last, Hamilton set the chalk down. "I cannot undo the damage," he said. "But I can promise you this. I will protect you here. No one will chase you from these halls again." Sam looked at him, really looked, and saw sincerity where once there had been only arrogance. He extended his hand. Hamilton took it, the grip frail but real. Forgiveness did not erase the past, but it planted a seed for something new. And in that dim lecture hall, among the chalk dust and silence, Sam felt the faint warmth of his grandmother's lamp, as though she were smiling somewhere just beyond the veil. Years passed. The scandal of Harvard faded into memory, replaced by new headlines, new triumphs, new failures. The world moved on, as it always does. Yet in one small corner of Massachusetts, a boy's promise to his grandmother still glowed like a coal that refused to die. Sam had grown taller, his shoulders broader, his face sharper with age, but his eyes, the same dark, burning eyes, carried the same light. With Hamilton's quiet support, he studied more formally, though never in the gilded halls. He preferred the shadows of the library, the quiet corners where discarded books waited for someone to love them. When the time came, he left Cambridge, not to chase wealth, not to claim glory, but to return to the place his grandmother had always dreamed of. A small, poor village where children worked in fields and factories instead of classrooms. It was there, in an abandoned barn with a roof patched by tin sheets, that Sam opened his school. The children came in slowly at first, shy, barefoot, their hands rough from labor. But when Sam drew dots on a board and spoke of prime numbers as stars in the night sky, their eyes widened. When he told them that even chaos had rhythm, that even silence had a song, they leaned forward, listening as though he had opened a door to another world. He did not teach them to chase money or prestige. He taught them to see wonder in patterns, courage in questions, beauty in truth. He showed them how Gauss had once been a poor boy, how Riemann had been sick and shy, how his own grandmother had worked on her knees so that he could look up at the blackboard. At night, when the children had gone and the barn was empty, Sam would light a small oil lamp, a gift from a farmer's widow, and sit with his notebook. He still traced dots for primes, still drew wavering lines, still whispered to himself about the heartbeat of the universe. And in that faint glow he felt her presence, as if his grandmother sat across from him, smiling. One evening a visitor came, an older man, stooped but dignified, Professor Hamilton. He had aged, too. His once proud stride softened into humility. He stood at the door of the barn, watching as Sam guided a group of children through a simple puzzle with beans and bowls. Their laughter filled the dusty air. "You've done more here," Hamilton said quietly when the lesson ended, "than all the endowments in Cambridge. You've lit candles where there was only darkness." Sam closed his notebook and smiled faintly. "The light was never mine, Professor. I only carried it forward." Hamilton nodded, his eyes misted. He did not speak again, but when he left, he pressed something into Sam's hand, a single stick of chalk, worn short, saved from his last lecture. Sam held it a long time, then he placed it on the shelf beside the lamp. That night, as snow began to fall outside the barn, Sam wrote in his notebook one final line. The primes still whisper. The proof may wait for another age, another soul. But the rhythm, the light, belongs to all of us, forever. He set down his pencil, leaned back, and listened. Outside, the snow tapped the roof in its irregular, gentle song. To Sam, it was music. To the children, it was a lullaby. To his grandmother, wherever she was, it was a promise kept. And so the story closed, not in the marble halls of Harvard, but in a humble barn lit by a trembling flame, a flame that, once passed from one pair of hands to another, would never die. Thank you for listening to this story of a child who carried light through the darkest nights. If you believe that light should keep shining, please subscribe and help us keep the flame alive.